On plain HTML web pages, a web browser sends a request to a web server, and the web server responds by sending back the page's HTML code. ASP.NET works in between receiving the request from the browser and sending the response back to them, and you can see this in action by inspecting the page.request and page.response objects. First, open the C# test sample file from your sample files folder. And open requestresponse.aspx.cs, which is the code behind file of requestresponse.aspx. You're now going to add a breakpoint to the page load event handler. You might be wondering how to add a breakpoint to an event handler that doesn't have any code in it. If you try to set a breakpoint on a blank line, it won't let you. Instead, set the breakpoint on the line with the closing curly bracket. Now run requestresponse.aspx in debug mode. The code is paused almost immediately, as the breakpoint is reached as soon as the page loads. Clear any existing watches, and add a watch for page.request. Adding watches was covered in Lesson 3.6. Note that if you were to add a watch for request instead of page.request, you'd see exactly the same results. This is because the page's code behind file is considered to be part of the page, so it can access all of the properties of the page object directly. This course shows the full path to avoid any confusion. The page.request object contains all of the information that was sent by the person who requested the page. Expand page.request to view its properties. Find the user agent property. The user agent property tells you which browser the visitor is using. In a slightly cryptic way, this property tells me that I am using Microsoft Internet Explorer 8. This will be different if you are using a different browser. The user host address property shows the IP address of the visitor. Note that ::1 means that it is your own machine. Lastly, the URL property shows the web address that the visitor entered to get to this page. Stop debugging now and remove the breakpoint. Now restart debugging. This time the page loads without pausing. As you can see, it is filled with lorem ipsum dummy text. Close your browser and return to the code behind file. Now add the following code to the page load event handler. Page.response.write, begin brackets, begin inverted commas, hello world, end inverted commas, end brackets, semicolon. Then on the next line, page.response.end, open bracket, close bracket, semicolon. Start debugging again to see the effects of this code. As you can see, the big block of text that was on the page before has disappeared and has been replaced by Hello World. This happened because ASP.NET doesn't add the page's content until it renders the page. Rendering is the process of converting its ASP controls into HTML. The page rendering event happens after the page load event. Because you ended the response with response.end before the page had a chance to render, the remainder of the page has remained blank. Microsoft's documentation contains a full list of the order in which events are executed. This is known as the page lifecycle. By using page.response.write, you added content directly to the web server's response, without it being on the ASPX page at all. This is useful for testing and debugging purposes, but it is better practice to use a control on the page to display content. ASP.NET allows you to listen to the user's request and modify the web server's response appropriately. In practice, you will rarely need to access the page.request and page.response objects directly. Close your browser and close Visual Studio. You've now completed Lesson 3.7, Understand Request and Response.